I came to America when I was about 7 years old, and people ask me, do you remember anything from Russia? The shocking thing is, I remember almost everything. I mean, it is so ingrained in my mind, everything that happened there. And then when I came to America, things kind of got much worse because it was 1980, 1979, it was Reagan's Evil Empire speech. There were all, the movies were Red Dawn, Red Gerbil, Red Hamster, everything was, So being a Russian really sucked. Especially, I went to a Hebrew school where I had to pretend I was born in East Berlin. It was better to be a German in Hebrew school than a Russian. I mean, it made no sense, So I actually remembered Russia fondly because I never went to school in Russia. I was very sick. I had asthma, like all Russian boys, And I had a grandmother who we left behind, and she died in Russia because she was very ill. She couldn't move. But she was a journalist, and she worked for Evening Leningrad. It's one of the newspapers in Leningrad. And she commissioned a book for me, and it was about Lenin. I loved Lenin. There was a big statue of Lenin outside of her house.
Commissioned a book when you were 7?
No, I was 4 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And she paid me in little slices of cheese for each page I wrote. So this glowing Soviet cheese was my inspiration. And I still get paid in cheese. Random House is very cheesy in that way. And so I wrote a book. It was called Lenin and His Magical Goose. And it was about Lenin meets this goose, and they invade Finland together to foment a socialist revolution in Finland. And then they have like a kind of Menshevik-Bolshevik argument, and Lenin eats the goose. And I remember my grandmother was like, that you shouldn't know. Because she was a good Bolshevik herself. It's just stop it when they conquer Finland. And that was the first sort of love I experienced, unconditional love, and it was related to writing, And it was like 100 pages. I mean, each page gigantic Cyrillic letters, but still, it really was something wonderful. And I never grew up technically in the Soviet Union. I left at 7, but the children's lives in that part of time were not so bad in the 70s for children. There was a lot of, we would go to the Crimea and Yalta and all these beautiful places, and the memories were quite good, except for a few of them, mostly related to my illnesses. But there was something, I always thought of that as home, which most people don't think of where they left as home. People, even at older ages, adapt very quickly, especially to America, which just gobbles up everything and produces the same wonderful consumerist stuff that we love. But for me, it was never, and the other thing my parents did is they never had a television until I was about 12. And that meant I had nothing to relate to because everything in school was about television. And they only spoke Russian in the house, and there was only Russian books. I remember at a parents-teachers conference in Hebrew school, one teacher said, we hear Gary's very smart, he reads Tolstoy in the original. And my father said, nah, only Chekhov. So that was So I both resented my parents for that because I wanted to fit in, and what they were clearly positioning me as was some red nerd, But then I made a whole thing out of it. So it worked out. Thanks, Mom and Dad.